Welcome to Cinema Tech Review. Today we'll be reviewing the Tamron 17-28 f2.8 zoom lens. If at any point during the review you want to check out this exact same lens, there are Amazon links below for the US, UK, Canada, and international links, but let's jump into it. As a commercial photographer and filmmaker, I've used this lens in the field for the past 2.5 years. The Tamron 17-28mm f2.8 zoom lens sells for $899 and comes with front and rear lens caps and a hood. Because all of my experience with this lens is outdoors, usually using an Aurora NXD 128 filter, the hood stays at home. I use this lens primarily for video and almost always have variable ND filter on the end of it. With the variable ND filter, I'm not able to use the hood on this. At only 14.82 ounces, this lens really feels light in my hand for a wide-angle zoom. For a wide-angle zoom that goes from 17 to 28 and is f2.8, the lens feels really substantial in my hands. It has a nice clean finish with no buttons on it. I find the buttons on the lenses to be quite a pain because I'm usually snagging those buttons, pulling it out of my bag. Instead, I use the manual focus override buttons on the camera itself because I'll always know what's happening. I won't have to look out over to the front of the camera to see what button is pushed. The lens does not feel cheap by any means, it has a very solid feel, and unlike other lenses I own, it doesn't have a rattling sound inside when it isn't mounted. The end of the lens is threaded for a 67mm filter, which is perfect for me because the other two Tamron lenses that I consider part of my holy trinity of lenses also take 67mm filters. So the 17-28mm lens goes perfectly with the 28 to 75mm and the 75 to 300mm lenses. All of those lenses take the 67mm filter. I've been using this lens since the autumn of 2019, and it is one of my most used lenses as a commercial filmmaker and stock contributor. I contribute to Adobe Shutterstock and Pond 5, and when I need to capture buildings in my shots or get the wide feel of a place, this is the lens I use. The Tamron 17-28 f2.8 zoom lens is compatible with both full frame and APS-C Sony cameras. On the APS-C camera, it has an effective focal length of 25.5mm to 42mm. One of the things that I find very useful about this lens is when using the clear image zoom on the Sony a7S III, the lens effectively has a zoom range from 17 to 42mm. This lens does have a maximum aperture of f2.8, which is constant throughout the range from 17 to 28mm. The lens has a moisture-resistant construction and a special coating on the front lens element that protects it from dust, dirt, and smearing. It weighs in at 14.82 ounces or 420 grams. The lens is extremely light for both 2.8 maximum aperture and being a zoom lens. The only other lens that comes close in this zoom range is the Sony G Master 16-35, which weighs a whopping 1.5 pounds or 680 grams and costs more than twice the price. At $899, this lens is a steal. The minimum focusing distance for this autofocus lens is 7.5 inches, which very nearly makes this a wide-angle macro lens. And that's 7.5 inches from the camera's sensor. Take a look at this 2-inch figure of the Buddha just a couple of inches from the front of the lens. It isn't a macro lens, but it allows you to get extremely close to your subject and really throw the background out of focus. The autofocus on this lens uses what Tamron calls RXD, Rapid Extra Silent Stepping Drive, which really does seem to work beautifully. The lens is almost completely silent when it focuses. It's compatible both with eye and face tracking as well as object tracking. If I'm planning to use the lens outside the studio, it is always important to know how the lens performs in backlit situations with the sun shining into the lens. I have been extremely happy with the way this lens performs and have examples of both photos and video here so you can see for yourself. Beyond sharpness, this is one of the most important things to me when looking at a lens. Focus and zoom rings move very easily and have a nice rubber feel on my fingers. The zoom ring does move easily, but it doesn't suffer from creep, which is what happens when the camera is pointed down. Sometimes the lenses will start zooming just from the gravity of the lens. This lens has no creep when it's pointed straight down. The unusual thing with this lens is that the focus and the zoom rings are reversed in their placement on the lens. Most zoom lenses have the zoom ring closest to the camera. This Tamron 17 to 28 millimeter f2.8 zoom has the zoom ring near the end of the lens. It's extremely wide and has a rubber feel to it. It works well both in cold and warm environments. It's wide enough that you could use it even with gloves on. This autofocus lens is extremely sharp and focus is almost always perfect. It works well with eye, face, and object tracking, even in low light situations on my Sony a7S III. There is no autofocus manual focus button on the lens, which keeps the lens nice and streamlined. For me, the buttons on the lenses usually get snagged when I'm trying to pull the lens out of my pack. So I prefer the autofocus, manual focus override buttons to be on the camera. Having the button programmed on your camera makes it much faster and easier than having to look at the side of the lens to see what the button is switched to. Honestly, I can't comment on manual focus because on this lens, I've never used it nor needed to use it. The two optional accessories I would highly recommend using with this lens are the Aurora XND 128 filter and the DJI RSC2 gimbal. This Tamron lens, when compared to the Sony lens overall, it is a lot lighter, takes a smaller, less expensive filter, and I do think both lenses are very high quality and will yield great results. For me, price, size, and weight are extremely important. Will I see any difference between this lens and the Sony 16 to 35 f2.8? Probably not. 28 millimeter to 35 millimeter is a difference in zoom range, but the extra weight of it on a gimbal would make it hard to carry. I don't subscribe to the thought of buy the best lens you can afford. I subscribe to the belief that you should buy the best lens that will give you stellar images and that you can practically carry around all day. If you can't bring it with you on your shoot because it's too heavy, along with all the other gear you have to bring, then the lens is worthless. When I'm not in the studio, the 17 to 28 millimeter Tamron lens is the first lens that I put in my bag for an adventure. If you want to check out this exact same lens, there are Amazon links below for the US, UK, Canada, and international links. See you in the next video.